Hi, I'm Sam Hawley, coming to you from Gadigal land. This is ABC News Daily. Over the weekend, the Russian president came closer than he's ever been to losing his grip on power, as the Wagner mercenary group attempted to overthrow his regime. It's been a confusing, chaotic few days. Today, Russian security expert Matthew Sussex from the ANU on what it means for Vladimir Putin's future and his war in Ukraine. Matthew, it was rather an intense weekend, I think we could say, for Vladimir Putin. And we're going to talk about how this all unfolded in a moment, because it really did look like at one point we were heading for a coup in Russia.
Whiplash on the global stage. The world watched minute by minute as the Wagner Group, soldiers for hire, turned on Russia's military. They started advancing into Russia, gaining ground toward Moscow.
But I think the best way to start is to explain the Wagner Group. What is it?
Well, the Wagner Group is sort of a private military company, but not really. Mm-hmm. It was formed by a close confidant of Putin who made his name as a hot dog vendor initially. Mm-hmm. But the aim of Wagner is to provide security, to train armies, and it does that mainly in Africa, in the Central African Republic, in Mozambique and other places, including Syria. In reality, it trains at Russian Ministry of Defense facilities. It uses Russian military kit. So really, it's a sort of de facto organ of the Russian state, and in particular the security services. And they've been used increasingly, of course, in the war in Ukraine. What that's done, of course, is to make its leader, Prigozhin, something of a hero in Russia. And now, of course, he seems to have been behind an attempt to overthrow the leadership of the Kremlin.
Okay, so let's talk more about Yevgeny Prigozhin, who you've mentioned there, because he's the leader of the Wagner Group. Just tell me a bit more about him. You did mention he was a hot dog vendor at one point, so he's had an interesting sort of background.
That's right. So Prigozhin was a hot dog seller in St. Petersburg. Now, when Putin made it into the presidency of Russia, Prigozhin suddenly started getting all the contracts for catering for official Kremlin dinners and lunches and so forth. And his company, Concord Catering, became very, very wealthy. After that, he went and founded the Internet Research Agency, which is basically Russia's troll farm, that it's used to interfere in elections and in politics and society in the United States. So Prigozhin shifted from merely providing state dinners to someone who was actively involved in Russian information operations. And in around about 2012 or so, he founded the Wagner Group.
Yeah, okay. And important now also, isn't he, Matthew, in the Ukraine war? Just tell me about his role there and the role of this Wagner Group. What have they been doing in Ukraine?
Well, certainly Prigozhin has been sort of activated or was activated by Putin to achieve some real battlefield results. So Wagner has been used in the siege of Bakhmut, the town that the Russian government has tried to take for many, many months, and only recently succeeded.
224 дня!
If Wagner retreats from Bakhmut now, the whole front line will collapse. Today, Wagner is the glue holding it together. We're pulling in the whole Ukrainian army, grinding them up and destroying them.
22 года!
Wagner has kind of shifted its model of operations. In places like Africa, the Wagner operatives are former Russian military, very well trained, highly specialized. In Ukraine, there have been some of those people that have been used, but predominantly Prigozhin went and raided Russian jails. And he said to people, I will commute your sentence if you come and fight for me. But, many of these people have been used as effectively cannon fodder to, suffer huge losses and then make way for the regular Russian armed forces.
So this Wagner group, it has been pretty crucial in this war in Ukraine, but recently things began to turn, didn't they? Mr. Prigozhin, he started to turn against the Russian military leadership. Just tell me a bit about that.
That's absolutely right. Prigozhin has been complaining about the Russian armed forces not supplying him with ammunition and also not providing support, basically sending his fighters into a meat grinder. And he's been particularly keen on blaming the Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, and the chief of the general staff, a man called Valery Gerasimov.
70%! Шойгу! Герасимов! Где боеприпасы?
And has posted videos of himself standing next to the bodies of dead Wagner fighters saying, this is all on you. You sit there in your offices and get fat off the state and get fat off their sacrifice.
Это чьи-то, отцы!
These are someone's fathers, someone's sons. Their blood is still fresh because Moscow is starving these fighters of ammunition.
Брать их потроха,
That brings us, Matthew, to this weekend. Let's unpack what's happened in the last 48 hours or so, because it's been rather interesting.
Yeah, well, it's a rapid series of weird events.
Yes.
Where you've had the government in the Kremlin say that Wagner is committing treason, an alleged attack against a Wagner base by Russian armed forces, and Prigozhin saying, well, that's enough, I'm going to come and get the Russian defense minister and the general staff, hopping in a great big convoy and taking over the southern military district in the city of Rostov-on-Don.
I'm in the city center of Rostov right now, in front of one of the headquarters of the Russian army.
Yeah, right. And the governor of Rostov at the time was telling residents just to sort of remain calm. They might have been feeling a little unsettled at that point.
There are a lot of Wagner fighters around and a lot of civilians. You can see a tank with a Wagner flag on it behind me. The people.
But the Wagner troops, they then seem to go further than Rostov.
Yeah, that's right. They went into Voronezh, which is north of Rostov, and about halfway to Moscow.
And as they're approaching Moscow, at the same time, there's explosions, roads are being dug up. It's quite dramatic.
Yeah, that's right. The Russians took it very, very seriously, or the Kremlin did. And, then Putin comes out.
Обращаюсь к гражданам России, к личному составу вооруженных сил.
And makes a statement saying that Prigozhin and Wagner are traitors, that there is a real chance of civil war in Russia, and there's the opportunity, a narrowly closing window of opportunity to eliminate this threat to the Russian state.
I shall repeat, any internal mutiny is a serious threat to our state, our nation. It is a blow to Russia, a blow to our people, and our actions to defend.
And, the ante was upped when Prigozhin, through his Telegram channels, said, well, the Russian president is mistaken and we are going to end up with a new president. It really started to look like a coup.
Matthew, then the Belarusian president, he stepped in. What did he do?
Well, Lukashenko says that he had been in contact with Prigozhin basically all day. And then you get this weird settlement where the Wagner convoy that's headed for Moscow stops about 2 hours short of Moscow. And all of a sudden it's announced that Prigozhin will basically go into exile in Belarus, that Wagner fighters won't be prosecuted for treason, that all charges are dropped against them and Prigozhin, and that Wagner people will be integrated into the Russian armed forces. And so all of a sudden everything is fine. I think quite clearly everything is not fine. And I think Prigozhin would be best advised not necessarily to take any assurances that he's been given about his own safety seriously. He should take them at face value, I think, based on the frequent lies and mistruths that the Russian government has come out with.
So, Matthew, I guess one of the questions now is, what does this mean for the war in Ukraine? I've seen people saying it could actually change the course of this war. Do you think, that will happen? Is it significant enough for that to happen?
I think that in the short term, it's probably not going to change an enormous amount because the Wagner forces had been withdrawn from the front lines to regroup anyway. So the people who are facing off against the Ukrainians are regular Russian military and have been for some time. They're basically the same people. But down the track, I think it is going to have some pretty profound effects on the Russian armed forces for a couple of reasons. One is that there will now be, as is typical in Russia, a huge search for the guilty. And there will be purges of those who seemed to be receptive to Prigozhin and a potential change in leadership. The fact that Wagner forces managed to basically pretty much unmolested get within 2 hours of Moscow is frankly extraordinary. So those purges will happen, and they'll generally be purging middle-ranked officers within the Russian military who are sympathetic to Prigozhin. Now, paradoxically, they're also the ones who tend to have the most operational experience. And this is going to cause enormous morale problems for the Russian military, I think, and which is already very, very low. And that way, I think it does potentially really affect the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, and problems I would have thought for Vladimir Putin too, because it has always been thought that he has this incredible grip on his country, that his power is sort of steadfast and cannot be challenged. So what does it mean for his leadership?
Oh, look, I think this is probably the beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin. This is a first direct challenge to his leadership, and a very, very showy one that I think will provide an incentive for other elites within Russia to say, well, maybe it's time for a change. This is dark times, I think, for Vladimir Putin, and probably, a second act to this melodrama won't be too long in coming.
Matthew Sussex is an associate professor at the ANU's Strategic and Defence Studies Centre. The long-awaited counter-offensive in Ukraine began earlier this month. We covered that on the 14th of June. That's in your feed. This episode was produced by David Cody, Veronica App, and Sam Dunn, who also did the mix. Our supervising producer is Stephen Smiley. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again tomorrow. Thanks for listening.
Subscribe to listen to more free podcasts or download the ABC Listen app and stream ad-free.